So this is really all about using wealth well, even though it may not be clear how that relates at first. This is actually one of the hardest of Jesus' parables, and you can tell if you read like the writings of Bible nerds or scholars or something like that, because nobody agrees on what Jesus is saying, what any of this means, or how we apply it. So we're going to go back through and talk about some of this, and I'm going to hopefully draw it together, and we'll see what's really going on here. And some of this is my own kind of research for a graduate program and using other people who are much smarter than me if you're kind of wondering where this is coming from. But as we go back through it, and I've had this experience already in the previous services, people said, oh, reading through it again, I realized there's a bunch of this that just doesn't make sense, which is good. All right. So Jesus tells his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So we called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management because you cannot be manager any longer. So he gets word that his manager is messing around, some kind of mishandling of things, mishandling of funds or something. And so he calls him in. It's kind of like, all right, give me access to your QuickBooks. Let's see what's really going on here because the hammer is about to fall. All right? And for this particular manager of his master's property, we're going to learn, that means he's not only out of a job, but he's going to lose his home. So the manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So this is a guy who doesn't have a lot of options. He is unable to do hard manual labor, and he's too ashamed to beg. And so he comes up with a plan to at least give himself a pillow to fall on when he gets the big old boot from his master. He called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. So he's going to these people, and we're going to learn in a second, these are people who are probably tenant farmers who work or who live on and work the land that is owned by this master. And they owe him X number of whatever that particular land produces. And he is cutting debts, saying, all right, so my master's not going to get 450 of those gallons of oil. Now you only owe 450. Then the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. And as it turns out, this manager, some call it the shrewd manager, the dishonest manager, or the unrighteous steward, or something like that. He goes by a bunch of different titles. He's actually the good guy in this parable, which leads us to say, why? Are you telling me, Jesus, that if I can cook the books a little bit, then I will be welcomed into the kingdom of God or something like that? No, obviously not. This is the scenario that Jesus is most likely painting. In the wider Gentile world, so not Jewish, so not Judea, not Galilee, but the wider Greeks and Romans, or the Greco-Roman world, it would be common that you would have a wealthy landowner who was so wealthy he owned multiple pieces of land. And if you were of high class, you of course would never stoop so low as to work that land yourself. And so you would engage in a relationship with a tenant farmer. So you'd become their landlord, they would live on your land, and they would work your land. And the land in the broader Mediterranean world, the big cash crops were olives for oil, wheat and barley for bread and grain, and grapes for wine. And the landowner would establish that, okay, this piece of land, you've got an olive grove or you've got a vineyard, that's expected to produce X amount of this product. And so in order for you to live on my land, I mean, this is not a cash-based economy, it would be expected, you will owe me, based on what I think that land will produce, X amount of this product. That's your rent, so to speak. Now, farming in the ancient world was an incredibly risky venture. It's not like the modern world where you can count on government subsidies or the infamous government buying up all the excess cheese to keep prices at least relatively sane or something like that. If you had a bad year, some kind of disease went through and just murdered your vines or something like that, you were stuck. And really, if you think about it, it will be inevitable that this will eventually happen. You will not be able to make rent, so to speak. A drought will come, again, crop diseases or something like that. That was going to happen. This was risky. But amongst Greek and Roman writers, so Gentile, not within kind of God's chosen people of Jesus and his fellow children of Abraham, it would be expected that this landowner, this master, in order to encourage his tenants, to have a better relationship with them, to gain a little loyalty among them, he would occasionally take the amount that they would owe him and take some off. Be like, you know what, this year, half it. Or how about we'll take a third off. You don't owe me as much anymore. And that allows the tenant farmer to breathe a little bit. It takes some of the pressure off of him. It strengthens the relationship between the two. And it makes the landowner look really good. I mean, imagine you're working for a business owner and he or she expects a lot from you. You work hard for them. The pay is okay. But at the end of the year, you know that, all right, if we have a really good year, he's going to take some of his profits and he's going to share those in the form of bonuses or pay raises or something like that. It hurts his bottom line a bit, but it makes you loyal. You're happy to work there. Hard work is rewarded. In other words, everybody kind of wins, even if the guy at the top takes a little bit of a hit. Now, think about that in terms of what this shrewd, the text says dishonest, I think shrewd's maybe a better word. Think about what he did. He's going to be out of a job, so he goes to these people, these tenant farmers, and it's still in his purview to do so. He knocks off a portion of what they owe. All right, your rent is now in half. Your rent, 200 bushels left of wheat or whatever. I have no idea how much a bushel is, by the way, so just use your imagination. By doing so, he makes friends with those tenant farmers, good friends, so that when he is out of a job and therefore out of a home, maybe they'd be willing to take him in. But in doing so, he also makes the master look really good. My landlord, he's so generous. I'm glad that he lets you do that. That really takes the heat off of me this year. It was going to be hard to make that rent and still have enough left over to sell to get enough food for my family. In other words, in this generosity, everybody wins. This is why the master commends this shrewd manager, because this manager made him look good. Yeah, he lost a little bit of money on his bottom line, but he strengthened their relationship. And at the same time, he gets a place to live when he's homeless. Everybody wins. But here's where Jesus twists the knife. He says, for the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. So feels like a really big twist. In a parable in Hebrew is called a mashal, and most parables or mashalim have what's called a nimshal. It's like this summarizing statement, and I think this is his summary statement. So who are the people of the world? Well, that would be people who are not us, people who were not part of God's covenant. They are not his fellow Jews. They are the Gentiles, the Greco-Romans. And the sources that we read that talk about this kind of landlord-tenant relationship are all Greek and Roman. He's saying that they deal with their own kind better, even though they have no ethical obligation to, than the people of light. He's saying our people, our fellow children of Abraham who are part of God's family. And the problem is that they should know better. We should know better. Because if you're a good Jew and you've grown up studying the books of Moses and studying the teachings of the prophets, you know that you are required. It is not a suggestion. You are required to care for the big four, the groups that are always on the margin in a society. And if you read through the prophets, you'll find it everywhere. Those would be the orphan, the widow, the poor, and the immigrant. You have to take care of them. That is part of being a member of God's covenant family. And yet Jesus is saying, those Gentiles do it, but we aren't. And as it turns out, Jesus is absolutely on point here. We know now that there was something of a financial crisis and a foreclosure crisis that was taking place during the time of Jesus and after. And it eventually bubbled up into, or it was a major contributing factor to a huge war that they lost badly, where people would be giving out predatory loans, especially to small-time landowners and tenant farmers, knowing that they were eventually going to default. And when they defaulted, they would come in and steal their land as collateral. That this financial crisis and these foreclosure crises were ways that the rich were taking advantage of the poor. Now, it's funny how irrelevant the Bible is to modern life, right? I mean, we don't deal with financial crises or foreclosure crises at all ever anymore, right? Humanity has moved beyond that. No, of course, this is painfully poignant. And Jesus is saying that the people who don't know better are able to do this, but my own people are failing miserably to care for those who are on the margins of society. And then Jesus continues, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. There's a lot to unpack here. But he is essentially saying, learn to be generous for those who need it. Because in generosity, everybody wins. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. In other words, use your wealth well. Use it in accordance with the principles of God's kingdom, of what it means to have God rule over us as his king, which means not using it as a mode of power, but use it as the example in the parable, a way to be generous. Now, to take a bit of a tangent that, as it turns out, comes together, and we're again in this example, we're talking about wealthy, those who are wealthy, but we're going to find out that this applies just as much, if not more, to those who aren't. There's a book called God and Money, How We Discovered True Riches at Harvard Business School. Now, for the sake of disclosure, I have not read this book. I've just heard the authors tell their story and the story of this book in a podcast, but it's a fabulous story. The two authors before they entered Harvard Business School, made gobs and gobs of money. And they decided that they wanted to make more gobs and gobs of money. So like you do, they went to Harvard Business School to make gobs and gobs of money. And they were already incredibly successful in their own right. So while they're both Christians, and they both were under the assumption that God's requirement for using your money was just that you tithe. You give 10% of what you earn to the church, and then that's it. It doesn't matter if you've got $300,000 or $1 million a year left. You can just do whatever you want with it. And so they got involved in this Bible study with fellow Christians at Harvard Business. And through a bunch of a course of events, they end up writing this paper. They had to take an elective, and they chose to take it at Harvard Divinity School. And in the course of that paper, they started asking, well, what are other Christians who are wealthy and successful doing with their wealth? So they took this database of all of these Christians who went through Harvard Business School and were part of this Bible study and sent out this poll. And they asked these people, like, what is your income, lifestyle questions, and what do you do with your money, and so on and so forth. And they were shocked by the results. It became a pattern that these faithful followers of Jesus made gobs and gobs of money and then gave tons of it away. They were using it to fund ministries, to fund charities and organizations who were working for just the greater good of humanity, but also for the kingdom of God. And they realized that this is kind of a crazy pattern, so they followed up and said, we know that this poll was anonymous, but are you guys willing to step forward and be interviewed, because we really want to find out what's going on? I'm not going to spoil everything, but at the end of their story that kind of led through, to this book, they were confronted with a question. Well, now, when they get out of business school, what are they going to do? They've been incredibly convicted that God gives them this wealth and they want to use it for the sake of his kingdom. But at the same time, being wealthy is not inherently bad. And as it turns out, one of them went to work for a nonprofit that actually helps connect followers of Jesus who make tons of money with other organizations that need it. And then the other one went into the private sector and makes lots and lots and lots of money and gives most of it away. See, in other words, they were so convicted by the fact that maybe God's intention for wealth is not that you just take your 10% off the top, there you go, God, and then we're just going to do whatever we want. But rather, this money, this wealth is a gift to be used to help those who are on the margins of society and help further the name and cause of Jesus. Now, I want to take you back to that phrase, which is in the title of this book. At the end, he says, you cannot serve both God and, it's translated money, wealth, and that's fine. In Greek, it's mammona. It's a Greek word that's actually Aramaic for mammon. And mammon is not just wealth. Mammon is wealth personified. What if wealth had a personality? And as it turns out, if wealth has a personality, which it kind of does, it is a very dangerous beast. It is an idol. It is a lesser god. It can consume people. If you are kind of on that track, then if not yourself, you've probably seen other people like it, and you've probably been tempted to it yourself, where you want more and more and more, because money brings power. It brings prestige. You have the resources to do things the way you want them to be done, to have things the way you want them. That is addictive. It is alluring to the human heart. We love to be in control. You cannot serve both God and mammon because this other god named mammon or wealth will consume you. But if you find that this may not apply to you because you are not wealthy, one, the fact that you live in Orange County in 2018, whether you feel it or not, means you are quite literally one of the wealthiest people in all of human history. Just for what it's worth. But two, if you find your relative wealth is not nearly as much as your friends, family, or neighbors, or whatever, mammon can entice you to a different kind of desire, where you are convinced that if only I made more money, if only I had $20,000 a year more, I wouldn't have the problems that I have. If only I could win the lottery, then all my problems would go away, which statistically is not true. Generally speaking, if you win the lottery, you have a high probability of it ruining your life within about 5 years. This mammon, this insidious god, this dark force is dangerous. On the one hand, if you worship the god mammon and try to serve it because you are successful and you want more, well, the funny thing about these kinds of gods is that they always demand sacrifice. And in the words of the great Tim Keller, the sacrifice that these gods demand are always human. Imagine the one who is driven, desires more success, more money, wants to climb the corporate ladder and is capable and is successful and works the 80-hour a week jobs to be the high-powered executive, and then looks back on his life and realizes that this mammon has required the sacrifice of his children, of his marriage, of his health, of the people he may or may not have had to step on to get to where he is. Mammon is a very dangerous god. Or if you're like the rest of us and you find yourself in the category of not having quite as much, and yet you really wish you had some more, the sacrifice that mammon will require is your joy, your contentment, and your peace. Because you buy into the lie that mammon will solve all of your problems. It is a dangerous god. Now, an interesting twist, and there are all kinds of gods like this in our lives, gods of power and money and so on. These kinds of gods, I mean, not God like the God, but these forces that have this personality that calls out to the dark parts of our heart, they all demand sacrifice, and that sacrifice is always human. Of who gets stepped on in the process or who you never have time for, and then they grow up resenting you. But in an interesting twist, Jesus, who is giving us this parable, is divinity, is God incarnate, God walking around in flesh. And he is the only God, capital G, who instead of demanding sacrifice, sacrifices himself for us. That if we want to worship mammon, it is going to kill us. But with Jesus, he dies in our place. So the darkest parts of our heart that want to serve mammon or are convinced that this mammon, this money will solve our problems, dies with Jesus. And in doing so, has given you a new heart and is forming within you this wisdom and understanding that to serve God means using wealth well, to engage in generosity and wisdom, that the wealth that you have serves you, and if you serve Jesus, it frees you to give and to use, to further God's kingdom and help and protect those who are on the margins of our society. And so my prayer for us is that we would use money well, knowing that money and wealth, this God mammon, will not solve our problems. It will not validate you. The power that you seek through this wealth will only eat you alive if you let it. But rather that Jesus awakens within our hearts this desire to use money in generosity. Because when we are generous, everybody wins. Let's pray.